Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hi, I'm Alessa Lanot. Welcome to today's episode of the Creative Process. And today we'll be doing watercolored florals. And I'll be taking over the page here on Crazy About Paper for today. So I'm one of Crazy About Paper's artists, and you can find my work online at go.crazyaboutpaper.com/um, life after breakfast. So you can find me on Crazy About Paper. Oops. crazyaboutpaper.com/life after breakfast. And I have merch there like tote bags, acrylic trays. You can find also some of stationaries, throw pillows, things for the home. And these are all like perfect for now when you want to redecorate your spaces, or if you want to add a little bit more color and happy colors into your homes. So we also have like new acrylic risers for organizing your desks. And what's great about this week is that you all get 10% off my merch. Just enter the code LabArt10 and you'll get 10% off all my merch on crazyaboutpaper.com. So make sure you take advantage of this special offer. So again, my name is Alessa and I am a watercolor painter. I also make my own handmade watercolor tools, and I'm a surface pattern designer based in Manila. So I do a lot of small watercolored artworks and I turn them into digital prints for reproduction. And I usually work on collaborations with different brands here in Manila and around the Philippines. And I'm really inspired by my surroundings. So a lot of the things that I paint are based on what's around me. Mostly things from nature and florals. So a lot of my work are botanicals, florals, and sometimes even like random things, like maybe sometimes like I'll paint different corners of the room or patterns in the house. Yeah. Hello. Hi, Regina. Hi, Shirley. Thank you guys for tuning in. There. So make sure you check out Crazy About Paper for more artist designed merch. So there are a lot of artists who have merch there, and you can support artists by purchasing artist designed products. Yeah. Okay, so today I'm gonna go straight ahead into our activity. We're going to be painting garden flowers. So what I normally do with when I want to find inspiration is I just literally step out into our garden, which is luckily a nice space for relaxing, and especially now, diba, when you want to escape from the news, from reality, a little bit. Yeah, and so I go to the garden and look around, and um, I sketch the artworks usually when I'm in the garden, or I take photos of it. So here are some things that I took this morning. I took I took some videos this morning. So of course, we have here Santan. Maybe you can comment what's your favorite garden flower, and maybe I can add it onto the artwork today. This one's a plumeria. Um, and then, yeah, and so I just go around, try to look at how the flowers are shaped. I try to observe how the petals blossom, or how the flowering order. So there are some heliconias here also. And then there's jasmine. And yeah, so we have some jasmine flowers. And then this is one of my favorites. This is the plumbago. I don't know if you guys remember this. This is the one with the sticky stems. We used to play with this when we were kids and stick it on our clothes. Yeah, that's the plumbago. And then I just discovered that we have a new bougainvillea that's white and has like variegated leaves. It's so nice. And we also have a few other bougainvillea colors. So maybe you'll paint a bougainvillea today and some santan and some plumbagos. So this one's like yan ang the pink bougainvillea color. So I'll try to achieve that color also today. We're gonna be mixing colors. Yan. So yeah, and then of course we have the magenta colored bougainvillea. So there. So I just go out and I try to observe what what petals what how the petals are shaped. I try to observe like how small they are or how big they are in relation to the leaves. And then I sketch them. I choose an angle. I normally choose an angle and I stick to it, and then I sketch and paint using that angle. So I'm gonna bring in my camera. I'm really just using I'm really just using a regular pencil. So these are my notes to self pencils. Yeah, more time offline. And then I have just a regular eraser. I have my watercolor set. So these are my handmade watercolors. Medyo gamit na siya. I really use them for all my projects. And these handmade watercolors are also available on my website, lifeafterbreakfast.ph, in case you'd like to check out, some art supplies to keep you busy, especially during the Holy Week holidays. I feel like painting is a nice way for mindful to practice mindfulness, to meditate. And then I just have this little dropper here to put in some water on my palette. I also have these ceramic palettes. So this one is one of my favorite shapes because there's a mixing plate in the middle. And then I'll be using maybe 3 brushes today, size 6, size 4, and size 0. If you only have one brush, that's fine. What you can do is you can just hold your brush. When you start painting, hold your brush in the center portion so that you can use more of the side of the brush. And then when you're adding the detail, hold your brush lower, and then you'll have a little bit more control over your strokes because you're usually used to writing with this angle or with this hold. And then when you want to apply the finest details, hold your brush as low as possible so you get more controlled thin, and you can utilize the thinnest part of the brush. And then one more thing that might not be seen on cam, I have like a little piece of tissue where what I use this to blot out excess water. Okay, so we'll start lightly sketching, and just like holding the brush, I would normally hold my pencil midway, just midway, so that I don't press so hard on the paper. The watercolor paper, by the way, I'm using is cold pressed watercolor paper. The brand is, what's this? The Langton. It's by Daler Rowney. It's 300 GSM cold pressed watercolor paper. I like painting on small sheets. This one's 7 by 10 inches, and I feel like it's perfect for, the size of the illustrations that I like doing. Okay, so let me start with a bougainvillea. Actually, no, we'll start with the santan because I want the santan to be on top. So I'll sketch the leaves. So the leaves of the santan are like almond shaped, and they're like a cross pattern, cross orientation, like this. And then you can change up the angles. Rotate it a little bit. And then the leaves also, the petals have these little things. in the in between the petals, diba? And of course, you remember your santan, with the sweet nectar. And then you can add a few more overlapping underneath. So you don't have to make all the petals look exactly the same because that way it doesn't look too natural. So what you want to do is to really like make them overlap, twist some to different angles. Normally, nothing in nature is really a perfect line. So you want to change up and rotate and loosen up your strokes to make it look as natural as possible. So we'll do a few, and then maybe we can do a few buds on the sides. And then we'll connect all underneath. Then you can add like a leaf. Underneath there. Usually I would paint my illustrations on separate sheets because I use them a lot for surface pattern designs. So I like having individual illustrations so that it's nice and clean. But for today, we'll try to make a little composition here. If you guys have any questions, hi Yoy. Hello Iris. Hi Yvonne. Hello if you ayan, I'm back. If you guys have any art related questions, feel free to type them in the chat so that I can answer them. And then we're not going to focus too much on the leaves, but we'll add a little bit more just to make the layout a little bit more interesting. And then next, we'll paint. Hi, Jessie. Hey, Cheska. Ayan. So we'll paint mostly details on the flowers, not necessarily um, the leaves. So we'll just, add a little bit of color detail on the leaf, pero more on the flowers. The paper I'm using today is the Langton Prestige. It's by Daler Rowney. But normally I would use Arch paper. Do I have it here? So this is my favorite also. Arch watercolor paper. 300 GSM cold press. I stock up on this talaga. Sometimes by the rolls. Hi, Miss Alessa. Ito talaga, si PJ. Okay, so back to sketching. So now I have a little santan here. I'm gonna add some bougainvillea on the right side. The shape, you want to take note of the shape of the petals because they are what give the flowers their own character and actually their own, specific genus. So we'll do some overlapping petals of the bougainvillea. Sometimes I like adding double veins when I sketch because I leave those out as a highlight and then do a few more here. Some curled leaves. Sometimes the leaves are, shaped or angled on its side. So you can see a little bit of the back part here where I do the overlap. You can see some of the back part of the leaves folding onto itself. We'll do some prominent veins on some. And then it has these little flowers in the middle also. Stamen. Okay. We'll do a few more overlapping. So the shape of the bougainvillea leaves are are almost round, but it has a pointed end. And there are about three petals. Sorry, I keep saying leaves. The shape of the bougainvillea's petals are roundish but pointed at the end. And there are about three petals um per flower. Now, I like drawing the veins, especially on like complicated illustrations like this because sometimes pag marami na, like it gets confusing like where your leaves are going. So they're like little mental notes to yourself when you're sketching. And what's nice about the sketching part is this is where you can like practice, diba, more mindfulness. It's like parang ito lang yung problema mo, diba? How to angle the flower. Ito lang for now, for this moment, this is the only thing you need to think about. Okay, so we'll add a little bit of branches since this is a shrub and it has, diba, thorny branches. And then put some leaves underneath. So when I draw the leaves, I first draw the vein, the direction. So you can start by just doing the veins like that. And then you add the leaf first. Then it looks more natural kasi naka-curve yung vein mo. As opposed to straight veins lang. Parang they're too harsh. And normally, diba, everything in nature like falls towards gravity. So yeah, it it's rounded and curved. Okay, so we'll just have like 4 of this para, matapos natin. And then I'll try to add some, diba, meron bang nag-request ng flower? La. Okay, so maybe I'll do the plumbago. Yan. Para ibang color. So with the plumbago naman, the petals are like teardrop shape. We'll do a few here. Tapos 5 petals. And then when I sketch petals, hindi ko siya sinisketch ng tuloy-tuloy. I'll pause and then I'll do on the opposite side. And then I'll do on the opposite side again and then on the other side. Because that way it looks more natural. Because minsan when you go around, it becomes like a mechanical stroke lang. Okay. Then maybe a little bit more leaves here. We'll change the angle. Sometimes pag kunwari same yung angle na na-drawing ko, I'll just erase and change up the angle. Okay, now if you're happy with your illustrations ready, you can start painting. And I'll start by painting the base color. So I'm gonna do about 2 to 3 layers here for painting. We have about 40 minutes left to paint. And I'll be painting the base color of the flowers first, and then skipping the petals as I go around so that I don't touch the gradients. We can start with the with the bougainvillea. Sige, the santan. Let's do the santan first since it's here on the. Since I'm right-handed, I usually start left to right so that I don't, go over the wet parts. So I will do like a red for the santan. Let me just grab my red. I have a nice bright red here. And what I do is I color. Let me show you my palette. I color the water first. I color the water, and then I use this as my dirty water. So for every color that I use, normally I would put a dirty water on my palette so that I can use this also for painting. I call this the tea mixture, as in chaa. So it's very watery and transparent, and you can see through it when you're painting. And then um, I'll start, para lang it's faster, I'll start with pure pigment, and I will apply. If there's too much water on your brush, you can dab it here. Apply pigment on one side of my petal, and then I'll use clean water to blend it out from the center towards the edge. And you can add a little bit more pigment just to help blend it out. So what you really want to achieve is highlights, midtones, and shadows. Bring it a bit closer. So you want to have some highlights, midtones, and shadows. Yon. Yeah, some highlights, midtones, and shadows on the sheet there. Okay. So we have a question here. You've been wanting to try watercolor painting. What are your tips and what material should you use first? I usually recommend artist grade materials talaga for beginners because there's less frustration when you're painting. The paper is a huge thing when you're painting with watercolor, so use artist grade paper like Arch, and handmade papers also if you have access to um, handmade art materials. Sorry, handmade papers. Those are also that are made of cotton. So the thing is with watercolor paper, it's made of pure cotton. So you want to use cotton paper. It absorbs watercolor much better than any other kind of paper. And you can check out. So I have these watercolor sets. You can check them out at lifeafterbreakfast.ph. They're all mixed from pure pigment. So I mix and mull them by hand. Hi, Crystal. Yan. Okay. So you want to let this dry before painting on the thing next to it. And while you're at it, so you can also apply the colors opposite color or complementary color on the opposite side. So in this case, the opposite color on the wheel of red is green. So you can add a little bit of green, mixing a little bit of green here on the red, and then I'll put some red on top just to bring it back to the red spectrum. So then you have like a darker shade of red, especially for the ones that are underneath or where you want the shadows to fall. So just keep going around and make sure you have your highlights, your midtones, and your shadows all around. You can also add a little bit of orange just um, to add a little bit of harmonious colors also. And then go slow when you're applying the pigment so that you have really crisp edges. And then you apply plain water to blend it out. You have to work a little bit quicker once you apply your pigment. So I like using the gradient effect for my underpainting or for the first coat. You can do since these are smaller petals, you can do two petals or even three at the same time. So at this point, when you're just coloring, it's it's less mindful. I mean, it's less um thinking about the shape and na of the flowers. You just want to choose where to put the shadows, how dark and how light you want the petals to be. So where there is a curve, like where there's a curved space, normally I would put a curved normally I'd put like a highlight there, and I'll put the shadows on both ends, because usually wherever there's a curve, that's where the light bounces from. Then sometimes I don't paint on the edge of the petal, so that it also acts as a nice highlight, and it makes painting on the petals beside it easier also. You just want to go around. You can mix up the amount of pigment you put in. Like for those areas where you want shadows to be darker, you can add more pigment, and then on the and you can even add the complementary color on top. Just make sure to put in your original color again to bring it back to the red spectrum. If you happen to add too much, so what you can do is just wet the area. Let's say I want to make this lighter. Just wet the area, and you can either scoop it out with a dry brush to reveal more, or get your napkin and just press it down to lift off some color. So there, pigment first, dry your brush, get water, and spread it out. The amount of pigment you apply will depend on how small or how big your petals are. So you want to be able to move your brush a little bit around, and then add some of the complementary color, just green, to create like a darker red. You can also mix a darker red on the palette itself. Like add some red on your palette, and then get some green and mix it in. So you want to be able to get like a darker red there. If you add more green, it's going to be a brownish green. If you add more red, it's going to be a brownish red. So this way, you can deepen your shadows quicker. You can add also a little bit of orange, red orange. Make sure you always have a clean source of water when you're working, because if you add the muddy water, art your watercolors will look muddy also. So change up the position of um, where you would put your pigment. Sometimes you can put it in the center. Here, where it's overlapping, I would put it underneath the other petal. And then make sure you blend it out before it dries up. So don't worry if at this point your artworks look like little blobs. It's really just coloring pa lang. You would normally add the detail after after it has dried. Yeah, so you just continue going around. We have like two more flowers here. So you don't paint on the petals that are still wet. I mean, don't paint next to the petals that are still wet. Kasi all the hard work for the gradient that you put, um, all that hard work will go to waste if you paint next to it. So the color that I'm using here is Cinnabar. It's a really nice bright red. And the watercolors, they come from pure pigments. And I mix them with gum arabic, which is the sap from the acacia tree. Alam mo yung dagta ng acacia tree. Yan. So, I mix it with that and mull them by hand, create these watercolors. How we have here pala. So go slow on the areas that are smaller. And then if you notice, I always like remove excess water on my excess water and paint on my brush. So change up the way you apply the pigment there. Shirley, why are you getting water lines? There's a question here. Why are you getting water lines on the side? What are you doing wrong? Um, it might be the watercolor paper that you're using. It might not, it might, what type of paper are you using? Usually, wherever there is water, that's where the pigment goes. So if you wet something, the pigment will flow to that area. So maybe you can try going slower and more careful to wherever there is water. Um, if you're you can also try using less water and spreading out spreading out the pigment slowly. But normally, if you're working with good watercolor paper, Strathmore should be a good brand. 140 pounds, so that's about 300 GSM also. Yeah, try try using or adding the pigment on the edges instead. Maybe you can try to work around the materials that you have. So here, I'll show you how to do that in a bit for the other petals. And then now we have, so now we're done. We'll just paint the little buds just lightly. And then the stems. So I use the steam mixture that we mixed earlier for those smaller areas. Usually for stems, ganyan. Okay, now we can move on to the next color. So I will just move this. Yeah. Maybe we can work around pink, and then since this is a lavender color, we'll use the pink first. So now I'm gonna mix some magenta. I love this magenta. Magenta and orange to achieve our bougainvillea shade. There. So you get that nice bright bougainvillea color. If you don't have magenta, you can try using orange and red, and then a little bit of yellow. So um, what we can do here, so I'll do another technique for painting. So I'll dry out my brush. I'll use a clean or a really light mixture here just so that you can see what I'm painting on. And I'm going to paint on the petal just using water. Just with this light water. And I'm going to avoid the vein, the primary center vein. Okay. And once you have this wet, I would wet it again because I like using a lot of water for this particular technique. And I'll get my pigment and drop it in and just let it blend. So if I feel like it's a bit too pink, I can add in a little bit of apricot or yellow orange. Some yellow orange and put it in. And then you want still to leave some highlights and some light parts. So I would just like leave this alone like this. Don't try to over mix it because it might create like a puddle on top. And then I'll leave out these petals beside it, and I'll try to skip to another area that it's not touching. We can start with water. Plain water, and then pigment. You can also try adding pigment, a little bit of pigment on the edge. Yeah. So if you have problems with like water lines, you can use this technique. There. So I will concentrate like the pigment on top of I'll concentrate the pigment on top of my sorry, at the bottom edge, just so that it acts as your shadow there. It's more concentrated there at the bottom. So normal I would suggest doing like maybe 30%, 20 to 30% shadow, about 40 to 50% mid-tones, and then the rest highlights. And then you can change it up. You can change up that percentage with every petal. Darken the shadow. I put the shadow on the base and next to the veins. So then the highlighted part is, it has a nice contrast to the highlight. Okay. Skip petals. And here I'm applying more pigment and then just using water to spread it out midway. So midway lang. And water, clear water the rest of the way. If you want to reveal more highlight, you can scoop it out and push it down with your brush. So you can either let your water control your brush or control your pigment, or you can use your brush to control it. And then I'll leave this part first and skip onto the next. And let's use water. Clean water. Then pigment. You can mix in some orange or some yellow to make it look more interesting. With botanical painting, they're actually very strict. You have to copy the exact color and the exact shape of the petals and the leaves, because they're really used for like scientific and medicinal purposes. So this is a little like a different take on it. It's a little bit more relaxed than real scientific botanical painting. Here, I'll put a lighter mixture on the side where it's curved. And then spread it out with water. So yun lang, you only need like a few swipes on each petal. Just, you can go back to it if you want to make sure, you want to add more pigment. Sometimes it lightens up as it dries. And then maybe we can paint already next to this one. To the first one we painted. So I'll add the pigment underneath. And you can add some of this brown that we mixed earlier. Just a bit. So if you want to reveal more white area, put water, just plain water on top of it, and then scoop out, and scoop out the pigment. For beginners, Giselle has a question. For beginners who have never worked with watercolor, do you suggest working on bigger images? It depends on the brush size that you have. So if you have if you have a larger brush, then it's easier to work on bigger images. Um, for beginners, I usually give like a size 6, size 4. I'm using a size 4 right now. So size 6 or size 4, size 8 brush, because it's a little bit more flexible in terms of the different parts of the brush that you can use. So you can achieve a lot with those sizes. You can use it as a wash like this, or you can use it for detail. Okay, so let's try to add, parang it's looking a little bit too pinkish for me. So I'm gonna try to add a little bit more orange into my next petals. Tapos I'll use the pink naman this time as the highlight. So make sure to drop in more water if you don't have water anymore. I always say that it's called watercolor because you use more water than color talaga. Okay, so we'll use a little bit of this orange. And layer it on top. So make sure you still have your gradients. Sometimes you get carried away with painting. You lose the shadows, or you lose the highlights. It becomes all just shadows and midtones. Okay, let's go around. And I have, ayan, nalilito na ako. Ano na to? This is another petal. No, it's not. This is not a petal. Okay, this is just space. Let's color this highlight. Then you can mix your original colors and drop them in. Okay, two more, I think, two more petals. And do water. I skip the middle vein so that it acts as my highlight like this. And then drop in my color. So normally I don't swatch my colors anymore. I just use my palette to see how the colors look like. Deepen the shadow. And then one last. Possible to paint without sketching. Yes, possible. Especially if you have like um a nice eye for, knowing where you want to place it. If you want to add detail to your artworks, then I suggest sketching it before painting, because you want to be able to see how, each petal is shaped. But if you are working on like a more loose approach, then usually those people who like that style, they don't really um, sketch before painting. So this sketching is to add detail, to add more detail into your art. There, it's coming together. Hi, Tita Florian. Yay, nice to see you guys here. Hi, Ralph. Okay. So we have one last petal. And then for the highlights or the folds, I'll just get again our tea mixture here and color those areas lightly. Okay, so we can move on to the next. I'll paint the center parts later. This one is a lavender color. So we'll have some violet. It's like a blue violet, actually. Let me just wipe this. So we have a blue violet shade. I just realized I chose all warm shades. So let's add some blue. You can use any blue. Maybe add a bit of indigo and ultramarine. Until you get your nice blue violet. And then with that, you can dilute it in water. There. So um, I'll use the same technique as the first one. I'll just paint with pigment. And blend out with water. So I want them to be really light. But still with some shadow. So you can actually turn your paper around if you're using smaller sheets so that it's easier to reach. You need to mix a little bit more pigment in. So blue violet. Yan. Okay. So make sure with this flower you use more water. You can do multiple petals because they're not, the nice thing about this is they're not touching each other. So you can do multiple petals while you have your pigment. And then dilute it. I'll dilute the center part first, just to make sure that it is not going to dry up there. And then I'll finish off with just water. one side. There. So once it's dry, you can paint the ones in between. So again, change up the areas where you apply your pigment so that the shadows fall on different parts. Bring them to the center. And one last. This one is underneath, so I'm gonna make it darker. Okay, almost done. There. There. Okay. So you can add a little bit more layers on top of the other petals if you want to add some, if you want to deepen some areas. While when they're already dry, you can layer on a little bit more shadow on certain areas using your tea mixture here, the mixture that you mixed earlier. If you want to deepen any areas. So I would hold my brush slightly higher just so that it feels a little bit more loose on my hand when I apply. It's not too controlled. And then we'll let that dry and we can start painting the leaves. To finish it off, we'll do the leaves. Okay, so I'm going to use a slightly bigger brush for our leaves. Empty an area here. Yeah, this is what's nice about ceramic palettes. You can just wipe it clean. Okay. And then mix in some green. So I'm using Viridian. And I have a new green actually, which I really like. It's forest green. Yeah, so it's a nice deep green. And I will just use the same technique. Apply the greens with a gradient effect. And then I skip also the primary vein and blend it out. You can deepen shadows also. Yan lang. Simple lang yung leaves because our highlight really is the flowers. And then I'll add a deeper shadow on the other side of the vein and spread that out with plain water. It's easier for bigger areas to apply the pigment first and then spread it out with your brush. And when you skip the vein, it helps actually in keeping the gradients nice and clean. So you don't touch the other side. Oops. Apply the pigment and spread out. Hi, Aya. Hi, Millie. Hi, Sean. If you want to create a darker green, you can actually mix red in. I'll show you quickly. Let's use some red on top of the green. And then you can add green again on top of it. It'll give you a much darker shade. You know, it's much darker than the original green that you have. And two more leaves. I really love this forest green because normally you'd add red, but the forest green gets it. You can deepen some leaves. And then add a little bit of brown for the bougainvillea. And then just tie this all in together. some yellow for the center of the bougainvillea. And that's it. So I'm gonna refine this after it's dry. Maybe go back to it. You can check back on your works after and add more detail if you want once it's completely dry. But thank you all for watching and tuning in today. Make sure you check out um, Crazy About Paper, crazyaboutpaper.com. Um, go.crazyaboutpaper.com/life after breakfast ph, and you can get 10% off my works on crazyaboutpaper.com. So my merch, all my merch there. There are a lot more things you can see there with artists also. If you painted today, please do tag us at Crazy About Paper Store on Instagram. And you can also tag me so I can see your work. Life After Breakfast PH. So that's it for today. Thank you all for joining us and see you next time again. For more, if you have questions, feel free to send me a message for watercolor related questions. And I'll be happy to help you with your technique. Okay? Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend. Bye.